September of 1944 lingered, not as a memory of harvest, but as a testament to frustrated ambition. Operation Market Garden, a bold gamble for a swift end to the conflict, had faltered, leaving the British forces clinging to a precarious salient carved into Dutch soil. This slender corridor, extending as far as Nijmegen and a little beyond, represented both a triumph and a vulnerability, a hard-won gain, yet exposed to the constant threat of German counterattack. Previous, determined assaults had sought to eradicate this unwelcome protrusion, so close to the German main defences, but the British held fast, their lines taut. The keystone of this precarious dominion was the vital road bridge at Nijmegen. Seized intact during the initial rush of Market Garden, it offered a tenuous but critical artery for supply and reinforcement, while the road bridge remained a vital, if singular, connection. The Germans had successfully severed another crucial link. On the 28th of September, German naval demolition experts, braving the currents of the Waal, detonated explosives, collapsing the Nijmegen railway bridge into the river. The road bridge now bore the sole burden of logistical support for any projected renewal of the offensive, a thrust intended to carry the war into the heart of Germany itself. The flooded lands between Nijmegen and Arnhem created a perplexing geographical dilemma, an island of territory controlled by the British, yet surrounded by water and vulnerable to enemy action. German attention inevitably focused on neutralising this troublesome enclave. On the 4th of December, German paratroopers launched a determined attack, a desperate gamble to wrest control. However, they met with a resolute defence, the British 49th Infantry Division inflicting heavy losses, driving them back with stinging precision. The attack failed, and the salient held. As Field Marshal Montgomery prepared for his renewed offensive towards the Rhine, he issued orders to consolidate the Allied position. The British Second Army was tasked with clearing the remaining pockets of German resistance west of the Maas River, a region known as the Maas Salient in Belgium, particularly around the town of Venlo. By early December, this objective was largely achieved. The Allied lines straightened, the German presence diminished. But the meticulously laid plans for a spring offensive were to be abruptly and dramatically disrupted. On the 16th of December, the fragile peace was shattered by a sudden violent upheaval. The Germans launched their surprise Ardennes offensive, a bold, desperate attempt to split the Allied forces and seize Antwerp. The Allied High Command responded swiftly, redeploying forces to meet this unexpected threat. Montgomery shifted the British 30th Corps southwards, bolstering the American lines as they struggled to contain the German thrust towards the Maas River in Belgium. This was not merely a redeployment, it was a dramatic shift. In priorities, a recognition of the immediate and existential danger posed by the Ardennes offensive. The planned attack east would have to wait. The British and Canadians in the north, anticipating a second German offensive in their sector, braced themselves for the inevitable storm. But, for reasons unknown, the storm never broke. General Oberst Kurt Student, commanding Army Group H in the Netherlands, had indeed prepared for a supporting operation, a coordinated assault designed to capitalise on any potential breakthroughs achieved in the Ardennes. If the Ardennes offensive had enjoyed any real success, Student's forces would have struck north, relieving pressure on the main German thrust. But the Ardennes offensive stalled, bogged down by fierce American resistance and logistical nightmares. It ultimately failed to achieve its objectives. Student's supporting offensive therefore remained a phantom, a carefully orchestrated plan that never saw the light of day. Nonetheless, Student had amassed a formidable force in the Netherlands, poised to strike across the Maas River. This force consisted of 3 infantry divisions, 2 parachute divisions, and a substantial armoured contingent, including 150 tanks and other armoured vehicles. The plan involved a daring airborne assault. An entire parachute battalion was slated to drop onto British artillery positions, disrupting their fire and sowing confusion before the main ground offensive began. The objective of this supporting attack mirrored that of the Ardennes offensive itself, Antwerp, the Allies' primary supply base in Belgium. Had Students' offensive been launched, it might have proved a significant challenge for the overstretched Allied forces, struggling to contain the German advances in the Ardennes. It is surprising, in retrospect, that it never occurred. The German paratroopers, spared the grand offensive, were soon to fight a bitter, largely forgotten struggle on the Maas River in the Netherlands, a localised conflict that would demand a heavy toll. In the waterlogged landscape northeast of Breda, a subsidiary channel of the Maas River wove its way along the river's southern shore, encircling a small landmass, the island of Kapelsche Veer. This unassuming patch of land would become the focal point of a fierce and protracted struggle. The British and Canadian front lines ran along the Maas River, with one notable exception. A strong German position stubbornly clung to the Allied side of the river. That position was, of course, the small island of Kapelsche Veer, stubbornly held by Students' paratroopers. Student maintained his grip on the island with a ruthless efficiency. Every 3 or 4 days he rotated the troops holding it, replacing exhausted or depleted companies with fresh reinforcements, ensuring a constant, unwavering defence. The Allies, understandably, viewed this German foothold with mounting frustration. Its presence was a constant irritant, a dagger pointed at the heart of their lines. The Allied High Command was determined to eliminate this annoying German salient. The problem was multifaceted. The German paratroopers occupying the island had entrenched themselves with remarkable thoroughness, constructing a network of bunkers, trenches, and fortified positions. Moreover, the approaches to the island were bleak, exposed, snow-covered expanses, offering little or no cover for attacking troops. They were, in essence, killing grounds, swept by German fire. In the waning days of December 1944, the Polish 1st Armoured Division, under Canadian command, launched an attack on the island, a determined assault aimed at dislodging the German paratroopers. But they were repulsed with heavy casualties, the German defence proving too strong. The Poles, undeterred, tried again in January 1945. This second attempt resulted in 120 casualties, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fighting. But once again, they were forced to withdraw, their assault blunted by the German defences. Like their comrades at Monte Cassino in Italy, the German paratroopers at Kapelsche Veer seemed immovable, their resolve unbreakable. The position, however, had to be taken. The island, though small, posed a significant threat to Allied operations. The capture of Kapelsche Veer was not merely a matter of military expediency. It was also a question of morale. The continued German presence on the island was a constant source of frustration and anxiety for the Allied troops in the area. Furthermore, the island provided the Germans with a prime observation post, allowing them to monitor Allied movements and direct artillery fire with deadly accuracy. German patrols regularly ventured across the frozen river, harassing Allied positions south of the Maas. The position, thus, needed to be taken to restore morale and deny the Germans a strategic advantage. The Poles also had under their command No. 47 Commando Royal Marines. On the 13th of January, the Marines advanced across the flat, snow-covered terrain toward the island. This was Operation Horse. German mortar fire was intense. Shells rained down on the exposed commandos, wreaking havoc on their ranks. The 47th Commando was forced to withdraw, sustaining 49 casualties, a heavy price to pay for a failed assault. It was now obvious that the island was stubbornly held, and the Royal Marines force was too small to achieve the task. The operation was abandoned. The Allied command decided to shift responsibility for the operation to the Canadians, specifically the Canadian 4th Armoured Division. This time, a much larger, more comprehensive attack was planned, an operation designed to overwhelm the German defences and secure the island once and for all. The operation was codenamed Elephant. The 4th Armoured Division tasked Brigadier J.C. Jefferson's 10th Armoured Brigade with the assault on Kapelsche Veer. Facing them were elements of General Lieutenant Hermann Plocher's 6th Fallschirmjäger Division, composed of a reinforced company dug in on the island, complemented by observation posts linked to artillery batteries, self-propelled guns, units strategically positioned on the mainland north of the Mars. The island itself was small, barely 5 miles long and 1 mile wide at its widest point. Yet, it was a formidable defensive position, protected by dikes up to 20 feet high, built to withstand the river's powerful currents. Operation Elephant represented a significant escalation in the scale of the assault. It involved 2 infantry battalions, 1 tank regiment, and a considerable artillery barrage, including the concentrated firepower of some 300 guns, a coordinated onslaught designed to crush the German resistance. Unlike previous attempts, there would be no preparatory bombardment before the assault. It was recognized that such bombardments merely alerted the German defenders, allowing them to brace themselves for the attack. Instead, the Canadians would attack in broad daylight under the cover of a carefully laid smoke screen, a bold tactic that would hopefully mask their movements and provide an element of surprise. To augment the assault, specialized flamethrower-equipped Bren gun carriers, known as Wasps, would be deployed, their fearsome firepower intended to clear the German bunkers and trenches. The attack would be multi-pronged. 2 infantry companies would assault from the east, while another would attack from the west, converging simultaneously towards the primary objective, the harbour. The Canadian Royal Engineers had constructed a pontoon bridge, dubbed the Mad Whore Dream, ready to be hauled into place at the eastern end of the island at the start of the offensive. This would allow tanks to cross the river and provide direct fire support for the infantry. In the meantime, the Germans had reinforced the garrison on Kapellschwehr, bringing the total number of defenders to 150 men, drawn from Oberst Martin Peters' 13th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. Student had issued a clear and unequivocal order to General Ploscher. The island must be held at all costs. Its strategic importance outweighed any potential losses. The paratroopers, renowned for their tenacity and discipline, took him at his word. They prepared to fight to the bitter end, transforming Kapellschwehr into a fortress. At 7:15 on the 26th of January 1945, the Canadian smokescreen began to billow across the water, obscuring the island from view. 10 minutes later, C Company of the Lincoln and Welland Regiment, supported by 4 Wasp flamethrower vehicles, advanced across the newly constructed bridge. They linked up with a company 1.5 miles east, this unit having crossed the icy waters in Buffalo armoured infantry carriers, a daring manoeuvre that exposed them to intense German fire. A canoe party had also attempted to cross, aiming to outflank the German defences, but they came under intense enemy fire in the harbour, losing several canoes. Out of the 60 men in this mission, only 15 made it halfway to the objective, a tragic testament to the risks involved. Meanwhile, a company reached its objective, a heavily fortified house known as Grapes, but the withering German fire drove them back, inflicting heavy casualties. By 9:45, a company was forced to halt its advance and dig in under intense enemy fire, close to their objective, another heavily fortified house named Raspberry. The German paratroopers launched a swift counterattack, driving a company all the way back to C Company's positions, which were behind it. C Company, in the process, lost all of its officers, leaving the unit in disarray. At 11:30, after hours of fierce fighting and heavy losses, the attack was aborted and both companies were withdrawn from the island, a bitter setback for the Canadians. In the west, B Company of the Lincoln and Welland Regiment crossed the river in buffaloes towards Raspberry, but were stopped again by heavy German fire, their attack blunted by the German defences. At 1200 hours, the initial assault had failed. Brigadier Jefferson ordered the Lincoln and Welland Regiment to try again from the west, while the fresh Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada would attack from the east, supported by tanks. The bridge in the east could accommodate tanks, but no such bridge existed in the west, which forced the heavy vehicles to be rafted across the river, a slow and dangerous process. In the east, 2 Stuart light tanks crossed the Mad Whore Dream, but could not negotiate the tall dike bank on the island. They were forced to withdraw, their attempt to provide fire support thwarted. The Argylls were now under heavy mortar fire at the eastern end of the island, the German guns finding their range. In the west, German patrols and a sudden snowstorm delayed the construction of the tank raft, further hindering the Canadian efforts. On the 27th of January, repeated attacks from both ends of the island were repulsed by German mortars, machine gun fire and artillery, the German defences proving too strong for the attacking Canadian infantry. Armour now appeared to be the only possible way to break the stalemate. The tank's firepower was needed to suppress the German positions and allow the infantry to advance. However, Canadian artillery fire was also causing problems for the Germans, slowing down their ability to reinforce the island. They only managed to move over parts of the pioneer and anti-tank platoon of the 7th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. At the eastern end of the island, 2 Sherman tanks cautiously crossed the bridge, their presence offering a glimmer of hope for the hard-pressed Canadian infantry. Then the much-anticipated raft in the west began operations, and 3 Sherman tanks were successfully landed there, bolstering the Canadian presence on the western side of the island. The tide appeared to be turning. On the 28th of January, the temperature suddenly rose. The thaw transformed the island into a morass of mud, hindering movement and making it difficult for both sides to manoeuvre. In the west, where 3 of the Shermans had landed, one became hopelessly bogged down in the mud, effectively locking the tank behind it. The leading Sherman, however, continued to support the infantry thrust towards Raspberry, but the tenacious German fire stopped the infantry in its tracks. In the east, 4 tanks moved towards Objective Grapes, where the infantry again was stopped by ferocious German mortar and machine gun fire, the German defenders refusing to yield. By 1400 hours, the Canadian attacks had stalled, their momentum blunted by the mud and the relentless German fire. The situation reached a stalemate. One isolated victory offered a small ray of hope. A Sherman tank managed to shell a 25-man German platoon, killing 17 paratroopers and wounding 5, a devastating blow that momentarily slackened the German fire. Taking advantage of this respite, the Argylls managed to capture Grapes, followed by the Lincoln and Welland Regiment capturing Raspberry. The 2 key objectives had finally fallen into Canadian hands. Although Grapes and Raspberry were now in Canadian hands, plenty of German paratroopers remained concealed in the tunnels and bunkers beneath the houses. They were not yet defeated. That night, they launched a daring counterattack and recaptured both buildings, wresting control back from the Canadians. On the morning of the 29th of January 1945, German mortar fire increased in ferocity, raining down on the Canadian positions with devastating accuracy. The German gunners determined to dislodge the Canadians from their gains. Canadian artillery replied in kind, unleashing a torrent of fire on the German positions. 14,000 shells were fired from its 25-pounder guns, a massive display of firepower designed to suppress the German defences. At 7 a.m., the Canadian infantry once more assaulted Grapes and Raspberry, determined to retake the objectives they had lost the previous night. The mud made movement incredibly difficult, hindering their advance and exposing them to German fire. Tanks were bogged down all over the place, their mobility severely restricted. At 12:45, the eastern prong of the attack, supported by 2 tanks, saw the Argylls retake Grapes, but Raspberry remained firmly in German hands, the German paratroopers clinging to their positions with grim determination. By now, the Germans were down to only 70 men, including 20 wounded, their ranks thinned by days of relentless fighting and artillery fire. They were holding positions around Raspberry and on the west side of the harbour. On the 30th of January, as dawn broke, 2 Sherman tanks opened up on Raspberry with their guns, the tank rounds smashing into the German fortifications. The barrage shook the island and reduced the German defences. However, it wasn't until 11:15 that the infantry attacked, and they got absolutely nowhere. Once again, as they were mowed down by machine gun fire and mortars, the German defenders unleashing a hail of bullets and shells on the exposed Canadian infantry. The Canadians were now only 100 yards from objective Raspberry, but they could not break through the German defences. The German paratroopers fought with a desperate ferocity. They tried again at 1500 hours, but were repulsed, their attacks repeatedly blunted by the German fire. At 1530, in a rare moment of humanity, the Germans allowed the Canadians to collect their wounded under a flag of truce, a temporary cessation of hostilities amid the carnage. Then, with 2 more Shermans in support, the Canadian infantry tried for a 3rd time that day, their determination undiminished. 4 Sherman tanks battered the German positions, their guns pulverising the German bunkers. The earth shook with each impact. The Argylls stormed Raspberry at bayonet point, engaging the German paratroopers in fierce close-quarters combat. The battle raged. However, any further advance was stopped by the remaining German paratroopers, who continued to resist with unwavering resolve. On the eastern side of the island, a German Panzerfaust team managed to knock out one of the Shermans, further complicating the Canadian efforts. At 8 a.m. on the 31st of January, the Argylls finally linked up with the Lincoln and Welland Regiment, consolidating their gains and establishing a secure perimeter on the island. In the meantime, under the cover of darkness, the Germans had quietly evacuated the island. Recognizing that their position was untenable, their mission was complete. German casualties for Operation Elephant were 64 killed and wounded and 34 taken prisoner, a heavy price for holding a small island. The Canadians suffered 133 killed and wounded, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fighting. The earlier assaults by the Poles and Royal Marines had cost 231 killed and wounded, bringing the total Allied casualties to a staggering total. In total, the Allies suffered 364 men killed and wounded trying to capture the tiny Kapellschevere, a disproportionate loss for such a small piece of land. It demonstrated once again what formidable and stubborn fighters German paratroopers could be, and it demonstrated also that, in the last year of the war, German soldiers could still fight very well and effectively, defending their positions with unwavering resolve.